Okay, this is Bob Gomez, and we are continuing our study in the Gospel of John. And last time we got as far as chapter 9, verse 34. So we'll start with verse 35. We'll read and we'll go on into chapter 10. And about verse 21 today. Okay, so beginning our reading, then we'll start at chapter 9, verse 35. Jesus heard that they had put him out, and finding him, he said, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" He answered and said, "And who is he, Lord, that I may believe in him?" Jesus said to him, "You have both seen him, and he is the one who is talking with you." And he said, "Lord, I believe." And he worshipped him. And Jesus said, "For judgment I came into the world, that those who do not see may see, and that those who see may become blind." Those of the Pharisees who were with him heard these things, and said to him, "We are not blind too, are we?" Jesus said to him, "If you were blind, you would have no sin. But since you say, 'We see,' your sin remains. Truly, truly, I say to you, he who does not enter by the door into the fold of the sheep, but climbs up some other way, he is a thief and a robber. But he who enters by the door is a shepherd of the sheep. To him the doorkeeper opens, and the sheep hear his voice, and he calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. When he puts forth all his own, he goes before them, and the sheep follow him because they know his voice. And a stranger they simply will not follow, but will flee from him, because they do not know the voice of a stranger. This figure of speech Jesus spoke to them, but they did not understand what those things were which he had been saying to them. Stop there for now. If you recall, in chapter 9, Jesus had opened the eyes of this man who had been born blind. And the leaders of the Jews, Pharisees, Sadducees, Sanhedrin, those who had more or less were the self-appointed leaders of the Jews, they were hostile to Jesus. They are seeking all kinds of excuses or reasons to put him to death or to discredit him. So when this man who had been born blind, when Jesus had healed him, they summoned him and they questioned him about this, and not only him, but his neighbors and his parents. And it came out that the man had genuinely been born blind, and there was no way to deny that Jesus had done this great miracle, this great sign. And this was a miracle which only God could do. A man who was born unable to see, and he had been made to see. And no miracle like this had ever been performed in the history of the world. And this was a miracle that only God could do. So this was one of those signs which is evidence that Jesus was the Son of God. We recall from the statement in chapter 20, verse 31, where the author, John, the apostle, says, "But these things are written that you might believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God." And so this was one of those signs which is evidence and which proves that Jesus was genuinely the Son of God, the one sent by God. into the world. So now there is this hostility between the leaders of the Jews and Jesus. And there really is no break between chapter 9 and chapter 10. That's one of the reasons which I read straight through, because it is the same scene. And Jesus is now going to contrast his own ministry with that of these leaders. And he is going to, in chapter 10, he talks about himself being the good shepherd. And the contrast is that these Jews are false shepherds. They are not true shepherds. And so this is what chapter 10 is going to be dealing with. So we have then the example of what a false shepherd would do in the case of this man who was born blind, whom Jesus made to see. So after they had examined this man and cross-examined him and everything, and found out that there was genuinely a miracle performed, and that there was no denying it, that instead of admitting that they were wrong and coming to Christ, acknowledging that he was the Son of God, they turn on this man who had been healed, and they revile him. They say that he had been entirely born in sin. That's in chapter 9, verse 34. And so they answered him and said, "You were born entirely in sins, and you are teaching us." And they put him out. That is, they put him out of the synagogue. So this is the way the false shepherds treat the members of the flock. False shepherds are only in it for their own benefit, for the prestige that goes with it, or the salary that goes with it, or the honor, or the dignity, or whatever it is that they are looking for, whether it's fame or fortune or power, or whatever it is that people lust for. That is the reason some people go into religious work. And we have the same thing today among our religious leaders. Many ministers are not genuine shepherds. They are simply in it as a profession, and they're in it for what they can get out of it, whether it's fame or fortune or prestige or power, whatever it happens to be. And so this is the mark of a false shepherd. Okay, so then when Jesus hears that they had put this man out of the synagogue, then Jesus, who is the good shepherd, he goes and finds him. We have a parable of the lost sheep in Matthew, where the shepherd has 100 sheep and he finds that one is missing, so he leaves the 99 and he goes into the wilderness to find the one that is lost. And so here Jesus goes to find this man who had been put out of the synagogue. Verse 35, chapter 9, verse 35, Jesus heard that they had put him out, and finding him, he said, "You believe in the Son of God." Some translations say Son of Man. Both those titles are of Jesus, and they both have to do with Jesus' person and his work. I think the King James says Son of God, and the New American Standard says Son of Man. It's just because there are some differences in some of the manuscripts. Some say Son of God, some say Son of Man. So Jesus is now presenting himself to this one who has been born blind and who had stood up against these leaders who were trying to get him to deny Jesus. may believe it. And Jesus said to him, you have seen him, you have both seen him, and he is the one who is talking with you. Okay, I remember when Jesus healed this man, he had made clay out of the spittle and some dust, and had put it on his eyes and sent him away to the pool of Siloam. And so the man didn't actually see Jesus at that time, because it wasn't until he went to the pool and washed the clay out of his eyes that he saw. For some reason, Jesus wanted there to be a delay of some sort so that the man wouldn't see him immediately. Jesus has his own reasons for doing things in a certain way. It's not that the clay had any healing properties. Jesus had to use some sort of means in order to do this miracle. Put the clay on his eyes, and then to go and wash the clay off at the pool of Siloam, and then by doing that, which is an act of faith, it was at that moment that he received his sight. So Jesus did the miracle without using any other means or anything. It's just that for some reason Jesus wanted there to be a little delay. Similar to the Old Testament, we have Elijah and Naaman, the Syrian general who came to be healed of his leprosy, and Elijah said, go down and dip 7 times and so he would be healed. So he did, and he was healed. Jesus sent this man who was born blind down to the pool of Siloam to wash the clay out of his eyes, and then he saw. But he, because there was a delay between the time that Jesus anointed him, the time that Jesus put the clay over his eyes, and the time he washed it off, that the man had not physically seen Jesus until Jesus finds him after he has been put out of sin. So he asked, well, who is the Son of God, that I may believe in him? And Jesus said, you have both seen him, and he is the one who is talking with you. So Jesus is using the healing of this man who's born blind as an illustration of spiritual blindness. Physical blindness is an example or illustration of spiritual blindness. And so just as Jesus gives sight to a person who is physically blind, so he gives sight to those who are spiritually blind. So during this interval of time between the time that Jesus anointed the man's put the clay on the man's eyes, and he now sees Jesus, the man had spiritual sight, even though he had spiritual sight while he still had the clay on his eyes. Then he washed the clay out of his eyes, and then he had physical sight as well. And so it was because he had the spiritual insight that he was able to give a good testimony to the Jews who were trying to break him down and cause him to deny Christ. Remember, they accused Jesus of breaking the Sabbath, and they say he can't be of God because he doesn't obey the Sabbath. Give in, but he gave a good testimony, and that was because he had spiritual sight. And so, in a sense, we can say that he had seen Jesus spiritually, even though he had not yet seen Jesus physically. And so now, Jesus said, you have both seen him, that is, you've seen the Son of God spiritually, and that means between the time on his eyes and this moment. And now you see him physically, and he's the one who is now talking to you. Okay, so the man is genuinely ready to receive Christ. So verse 38 says, and he said, Lord, I believe, and he worshipped him. Okay, so this is indication that this is genuine salvation, that the person genuinely believed because he worshiped Jesus. And this is completely proper because Jesus is God. Being the Son of God, he is equal to God. He is God. He is one of the members of the Trinity. And so the man had true spiritual sight. And he believed and he worshiped Jesus. And so this is the true response of all children of God. We should worship Jesus because he is God. Okay, then Jesus goes on speaking. Remember the crowd around him is a mixed crowd. There's some of the Jews, the leaders of the Jews who are hostile to him and trying to catch every word he says so they can distort it and use it against him. There's just some multitudes there who are just listening to him to be taught. Some of them think he's a prophet. Some of them are sympathetic with the Jews who want to put him to death. There's his disciples or some believers. And so Jesus now is talking to those who are around him. And he says, in verse 30, Jesus said, "For judgment I came into this world, that those who do not see may see, and that those who see may become blind." Those Pharisees who were with him heard these things and said to him, "We are not blind too, are we?" Jesus said to them, "If you were blind, you would have no sin. But since you say, 'We see,' your sin remains." Okay, there in the last verse, verse 41, Jesus is taking their opinion of themselves and commenting on it. Because that is what controls what a person does. If a person thinks that he knows the truth, then he will not come to Jesus. If a person thinks that he knows how to be saved, then he will think that he doesn't need Jesus. In Proverbs 14, Proverbs says, "There's a way which seems right unto a man, but the ways thereof are the ways of death." So if a person thinks that he knows how to be saved without investigating salvation through Christ, he will not bother coming to Christ because he thinks that he sees. For example, a person who thinks that if you're a good person, then God will receive you into heaven when you die. And he says, "Well, what need do I have of Christ? I'm a good person. I haven't done many bad things. The bad things I have done really weren't all that bad. I haven't murdered. I haven't done any other great heinous crimes. I haven't killed anybody, anything like that." So he said, "Well, in general, I have a lot of good works. I'm a good citizen. I help whoever I can, as much as I can. And so God certainly wouldn't send me to hell. So why do I need Jesus?" So here's a person who thinks that he sees. And so this is what Jesus is dealing with, what a person thinks of himself. He is not dealing with the absolute truth. He says, even though you think you see, you're really spiritually blind. Because the main thing that controls what a person does is what he thinks he has, right? So if a person thinks that he is on the right track, he is not going to bother looking or checking out to see if he's not. These Jews, they thought that since they were born physical descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, they thought they didn't need salvation. So they thought that they were saved. They thought that because they had a certain amount of knowledge of the Old Testament, that they were qualified to be teachers, to be guides of the blind, and so forth. And Paul deals with this in the book of Romans, chapter 2. So they thought that they had spiritual sight. They thought that they could see. And so this is what Jesus is dealing with. He's dealing with what the person thinks about himself, not what is actually true. And this is what will cause most people, or actually cause people not to seek salvation through Christ if they think that they can be saved without Christ. And so, verse 39 then, Jesus says, "For judgment I came into this world, that those who do not see may see." So what is those who realize that they don't see, then they will search for God and seek God, and they will find God. Because God has said, if you seek me with all your heart, you will find me. Ask and you shall receive, seek and you shall find, knock and it shall be opened to you. So a person who realizes that they are spiritually blind, then they will seek God, and God will reveal himself to them, and they will see. So he says, for judgment I came into the world, that those who do not see may see, and those who see, or those who think they see, may become blind. And so this is what has happened. It's illustrated in this chapter 9 in the way these Pharisees have treated this man who was born blind. They think that they have knowledge of God and of his scriptures and of his will and everything. But in actuality, this is a case where a little bit of knowledge is a dangerous thing, because they had a certain degree of knowledge, but it wasn't sufficient, or it wasn't complete. They did not see Christ in the scriptures. What they saw was the law, the requirements to be in good standing with God, but they did not see Christ. So because they did not see Christ in the scriptures, they did not recognize Christ as the Messiah when he came. So they thought that they saw spiritually, but they became blind, as Jesus said. And the blind man, who is an illustration of people who know they are blind, well, they receive sight. Okay, so the Pharisees then, verse 40, those are the Pharisees who were with him, heard these things, and said to him, "We are not blind too, are we?" Well, of course, the answer is yes. But Jesus answers them indirectly. He says, "If you were blind, you would have no sin." Now, sin he's talking about here is the sin of unbelief, the sin of rejecting Christ. And this is the main sin. If you receive Christ, all your other sins will be forgiven. If you don't receive Christ, you will die in your sins, and none of them will be forgiven after you die. So whether or not you receive Christ is the main issue. It's the sin of unbelief. So when Jesus talks about sin here, he's talking about the sin of unbelief. He says, if you were blind, you would have no sin. If you realized you were blind, then you would seek Christ and come to him and get your sins forgiven. Similar to the Apostle Paul before he was saved. He was guilty of murder because he put Christians to death. He persecuted the church. He called himself the chief of sinners. But when he comes to Christ, then he's forgiven. And so that would be true of these Pharisees if they came to Christ. All the sins which they had committed in their blindness before they received Christ, they would all be forgiven. So they would have no sin. But, last part of verse 41 there, since you say, we see, in other words, they think they see, they think they have the truth, they think they know the truth of God, how do we say that? But yet, they don't. But since you say we see, your sin remains. So in other words, the sin of unbelief, of rejecting Christ. because they think they don't need Christ, and so they are rejecting Christ, and so they are not going to be rid of that sin because they are going to continue to reject Christ because of the things that they see. Okay, so now these Pharisees, because they were self-appointed, they thought that they were teachers of God's Word, guide to the people of God. They are what Jesus calls the false teachers, false shepherds. And so Jesus is going to be comparing himself. Jesus is going to be comparing himself to these false teachers, to these Jews. And so he goes on right into chapter 10, verse 1. He says, "Truly, truly, I say to you, he who does not enter by the door into the fold of the sheep, but climbs up some other way, he is a thief and a robber. But he who enters by the door is a shepherd of the sheep." So now he's taking a illustration or a lesson from something that is common knowledge to these people. Even the people that lived in the city, they knew, what went on around them about the shepherds. Not so much like nowadays, we who live in the city, we're kind of sheltered from what goes on out on the farms and stuff like that. It wasn't that much of a separation. But here he's talking about a sheepfold. That would be like we would call a corral. And the shepherds each had their flock, and at night all the shepherds, a number of shepherds, would bring their flocks in and put them into the corral so that the flocks would get intermingled and mixed. And that's where they would stay at night. And then in the morning, the shepherd would come, and the corral had only one door. He would come, and the sheep knows the voice of their shepherd. And so he would call his sheep. The sheep that were in his flock would go to him, and all the other sheep would go away from him. So then he would lead his own sheep out the door. Then another shepherd would come up, and he would call his flock, and that flock would go to him, and all the others would go to the other side of the corral. And so he would lead his sheep out, and so forth. And so this is the picture that Jesus is showing, and he's now comparing himself with these Jewish leaders, Pharisees, and so forth. And he's saying that they are there at the end of verse 1, he says, "He who does not enter by the door into the fold of the sheep, but climbs up some other way, he is a thief and a robber." Okay, so spiritually speaking, then, these Pharisees are thieves and robbers because they do not know the sheep the way Jesus knows his sheep, and they are trying to get a following, not because they care for the sheep, but because they want to steal the sheep. So they want to get sheep to follow them for their own selfish reasons, whether it be the prestige that comes along with that, or the power, or whatever. Whatever it is, they do not have the interests, the spiritual interests of the sheep at heart. So you might picture one of these thieves or robbers. They come around to the backside of the corral, and the sheep, he either steals them by taking them out of the corral and leading them off. And these sheep, they don't know the voice of their own shepherd, and so they follow the false shepherd. But the point is that they do not go through the door. The thief and the robber, they climb up some other way. Verse verse 2, but he who enters by the door is the shepherd of the sheep. Okay, so we could have kind of a dual lesson here. One, of course, is Jesus himself, who is the good shepherd. And he is the one who primarily the message is about. And then there are also those faithful ministers of Christ who go through Christ's door and lead the sheep and so forth. And so this actually applies, has two applications. The primary application is to Jesus himself, and the secondary application would be to his faithful shepherds, the ones who watch over his sheep. Okay, so there are those faithful shepherds who are in the ministry because they truly have a heart for the people of God. Okay, but now when he's talking about this false shepherd, he's talking about the Pharisees who are right there in his presence. He says, but he who enters by the door is the shepherd of the sheep. To him the doorkeeper opens, and the sheep hear his voice, and he calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. When he puts forth all his own, he goes before them, and the sheep follow him because they know his voice. And a stranger they simply will not follow, but will flee from him because they do not know the voice of strangers. Okay, so here the genuine people of God will follow Christ and will also follow those ministers who are faithful ministers of Christ, who are preaching and teaching the word faithfully. But then there are those who will follow the false shepherds. Although they're not specifically spoken here, we can take them as in contrast to the true sheep who know the shepherd and follow only him. Then, in contrast to that, there would be the sheep who follow strangers, those who do not check out the doctrine or who think they're okay and think that the church is only a social organization or something else. Okay, verse 6 then. This figure of speech Jesus spoke to them, but they did not understand what those things were which he was saying to them. Jesus therefore said to them again, truly, truly, I say to you, I am the door of the sheep. So here he's using the same general subject of shepherd, sheep, and corrals, but there's no one figure which would completely describe all the merits of Christ, and so now he uses a different figure. He uses the figure of the door. The door can be thought of as the door to the sheep, or it can be thought of as the door for the sheep. The shepherd uses the door to get to the sheep. And so the shepherd, the true shepherd, then goes through the door, through Christ, to get the sheep and to lead them. And then the door for the sheep, that's Christ. And in order to become a member of the flock, they have to go through Christ for their salvation. So then, here in verse 8, says, all who came before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep did not hear them. So the true people of God, the true sheep, would not follow a false teacher or a false shepherd, but they only follow Christ and those who are his faithful ministers. Okay, so here he is the door for the true shepherds to get to the sheep, to lead them out to pasture, to feed them, besides still waters and so forth, as we have another picture in the top. Still waters. Okay, so this is the way that the true shepherd cares for his God. And verse 9 then, I am the door. If anyone enters through me, he shall be saved, and shall go in and out and find pasture. Okay, so this is Jesus is the door for the sheep to go in and out. You can only get to God through Christ. He is the way, the truth, and life. No man comes to the Father but by him. So the only way to eternal life is through Christ. And through him is salvation. Okay, so there's only one door to these sheep that go out. Okay, so this then is contrast to the motives of the false shepherds, the thief. The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. Well, you think the rustler, you think the Old West who rustles the cattle. That's all he's interested in is rustling the cattle and then he takes them. Usually they're slaughtered and they're sold or whatever. Some of the sheep may be foolish enough to follow these false shepherds. And unfortunately, they will be destroyed because they will not be saved by following these false teachers, these false shepherds. And so we see that the false shepherds then are just in it for their own personal gain, to steal them, to slaughter them, to sell them to meat packers or whatever, sell the hides, to leather and so forth, whatever profit they can get out of it. The false shepherds are in for. And by contrast, there, in the middle of verse 10, Jesus said, I came that they may have life and have it abundantly. Okay, so this then is the purpose of Christ coming into the world, is to give eternal life for his sheep. And more abundant life, both in this world and in heaven. And in verse 11 it says, I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. Okay, now here Jesus is going far beyond what a shepherd ordinarily does. The shepherd might risk his life to protect the flock, but he would not want to give his life, because once he is dead, then the flock is helpless. Then the flock itself is lost. Because if a pack of wolves, for example, attacks the flock and he goes out and he gets killed, well then the sheep then are at the mercy of the wolves. And of course they are not merciful. So a true shepherd, ordinary shepherd wants to preserve his own life so that he can protect the flock. But by contrast, the way that Jesus saves the flock is by dying. And so here, Jesus is showing a contrast between what himself did and what an ordinary, or a regular good shepherd would risk his life to save the flock, but would not want to die. But Jesus saves the flock by dying. He says, I am the good shepherd. So that's what makes it the word the. I am the good shepherd. And he is the only one. He is the only one. He is the unique good shepherd. There is no other good shepherd. He is the only good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. Okay, by contrast then, he who is a hireling and not a shepherd, who is not the owner of the sheep, beholds the wolf coming, and leaves the sheep, and flees, and the wolf snatches them and scatters them. He flees because he is a hireling and not concerned about the sheep. So let's say this false shepherd, the one who is wrestling with the sheep, he's in the process of stealing them, leading them away so that he can slaughter them, butcher them, and sell their products and so forth. But as he's leading them away, he's attacked by wolves. Well, he's not going to stick around and protect these sheep, so he's going to leave. So the hireling here can give the wrong idea. It's not the owner who hires these people to watch his flock. These are thieves who actually the word hireling is not a good word because they're actually thieves, not somebody who's hired by the owner to watch over the flock. These are people who are stealing the flock, and so while they're in the process of stealing the flock gets attacked by wolves. They don't stick around to protect the flock. They say, well, next time there'll be another day in which I can steal another flock and then I can profit from that. Okay, so this hireling is not willing to protect the sheep because he is going to kill them and destroy them anyway himself. Okay, so verse 14 then, Jesus says, I am the good shepherd, and I know my own, and my own know me. Now, this is another difference between these false shepherds, is that he knows each one of us, and we know him. The one who comes to steal, he doesn't know the sheep. He doesn't even care to know them. The sheep don't know him. He steals them. There might even be some of them who are foolish enough to follow him. But in any event, they don't really know him because he is a stranger to them and they are strangers to him. And the knowledge which Jesus has of each one of us is, in a way, like the knowledge between the persons of the Trinity. Verse 15 says, even as the Father knows me, and I know the Father, and I lay down my life for the sheep. Okay, so Jesus as the Good Shepherd knows us, and we know him. So there is this mutual knowledge, similar to the knowledge between the Father and the Son. Okay, verse 16, and I have other sheep which are not of this fold. I must bring them also, and they shall hear my voice, and they shall become one flock with one shepherd. Okay, so this refers to Gentiles. And remember, John is writing this gospel to Gentiles, actually to the church, the members of the church. And so he does refer to the salvation of the Gentiles in this gospel. And so when he says, I have other sheep, he's talking about Gentiles who will be brought in and will saved and become members of the church. So this other sheep and this other fold is referred to the church. The fold he was referring to before is Israel. So when he said, I have other sheep which are not of this fold, he's talking about Gentiles and the church. And he says, I must bring them also, and they shall hear my voice, and they shall become one flock with one shepherd. Okay, so at any one time, Jesus has only one, we might say, body or group on earth. Before the day of Pentecost, let's say from the time of the Exodus until the day of Pentecost, it was the nation of Israel that God was dealing with. Now since Pentecost until today, God is dealing with the church. So we have two distinct folds. And so if a person who is a Jewish, son of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, if they receive Christ, among members of the church. And so at any one time, there's only one group, one flock. So we can say over the entire span of time, there have been Israel, and the other one is the church. But they were not simultaneously on the earth, either one or the other. And then after the rapture, then we will be there once again with Israel during the tribulation. And the millennium will be a different setup. Okay, so it says they, verse 16, and they shall become one flock with one shepherd. We can look at all the saved as being one group, and the unsaved as being another group. But within the group of the saved, we can also see distinctions. There would be those who were of Israel from the Old Testament before the day of Pentecost, and there will be those who were members of the church. But they all were saved through Christ. Verse 17, for this reason the Father loves me, because I lay down my life that I may take it again. So this shows the obedience of Christ to the Father as He came into the world, laying aside the glory which He had with the Father before His incarnation, and in obedience to the Father, He came into the world to lay down His life, and He did it for the purpose of not only of saving us, but that He might take it again. Now He's talking here about the resurrection. He died on the cross, He was buried, and He rose again. That's what He means by taking it again. In other words, He gave His life, died, and He was dead for 3 days, and then came back to life. So He took His life back into human physical body. So this is what He's talking about. He laid it down in order that He might take it again. And this resurrection is also necessary for our salvation. Apostle Paul defines the gospel in 1 Corinthians 15 that Christ died for our sins according to the Scriptures, that He was buried, and He rose again on the third day. So the death, burial, and resurrection are all part of God's saving action or act. So for us, the resurrection of Christ is proof that His death satisfied the demands of God's justice. God's justice required death to pay for sin. Now, if Jesus did not come back, we would never know whether Jesus was satisfied. But since Jesus came back from death, shows that He was victorious, that death had been conquered, sin and death were conquered by the death of Christ. And so He paid the penalty that which justice demanded. The wages of sin is death. And so He paid that, and so after satisfying that requirement, then He came back to life. And then He shows that He did this voluntarily. Verse 18, no one has taken it away from me, but I laid it down on my own initiative. In other words, Jesus was not killed against His will. It was Jesus' purpose when He came into the world to die. He came to save the lost, and to give His life a ransom for many. He came into the world with the purpose, with the intention of dying. So He wasn't murdered or killed against His will. And it happened all according to His schedule, to His own timetable. There was no they took up stones to cast at him, but his time had not yet come. So everything was done according to schedule. In the middle of verse 18 it says, I have authority to lay it down, and I have authority to take it up again. So the authority there would be the right, the power, the freedom to do it. Actually, when he prayed in the Garden of Gethsemane, he says, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me, but my will, but yours be done. So he voluntarily submitted to the will of the Father. So he laid down his life voluntarily for us. He was a good shepherd, and he died for us because that's what he had to do in order to save us. And he had the power to lay it down and to take it up again. And then the last part of verse 18 says, this commandment I received from my Father. Okay, so this was the assignment which the Father gave him when he came into the world. Verse 19 says, there arose a division again among the Jews because of these words. And many of them were saying, he has a demon and is insane. Why do you listen to him? Others were saying, these are not the sayings of one demon possessed. The demon cannot open the eyes of the blind. Okay, so once again, there are those who are opposed to Jesus and who don't accept his teaching. And so they accuse him of being demon-possessed, as if the things that he was teaching were teachings of the devil, that he was out of his mind. These, of course, were the Jews, the ones who were seeking to kill him, and those who were sympathetic with him. And they did not recognize Jesus as the Savior, as the Son of God. Others were saying, verse 21, these are not the sayings of one demon. Okay, so to them it's like they are the sheep who hear the good shepherd's voice. And they follow him. So the demon cannot open the eyes of the blind, can he? It's another way of saying this is not one of those false shepherds. This is not a thief. This is not a liar. This is not one who has come to steal and to destroy and to kill. This is the true shepherd. And so that's what this whole section then is showing, is that Jesus is the true shepherd who has come, who knows us, he loves us, he died for us, he rose again from the dead for us. And so those who are the true shepherd, the true sheep, recognize the voice of the true shepherd and they follow him. On the other hand, there are the false shepherds who come only to steal, kill, and destroy. And they came with false teaching. They think that they see, but they are really the blind ones. And then there are some sheep who are foolish enough. They're not true sheep, they're not the true people of God, but they're foolish enough to follow these false shepherds, and so they go on into eternal death and eternal destruction. As Proverbs 14:12 says, there is a way which seems right unto a man, but the end thereof are the ways of death. Okay, so we'll stop here and we'll pick up next time, chapter 10, verse 22.